Skyrim hands us 27 dragon shouts. Some feel like divine power, others feel like a bad joke, and a few are so busted they practically drag us through the game by themselves. I've already ranked every shout from worst to best, and I've even given you my updated top 10. But today we're doing something different. Instead of lumping them all together, I've split them into 7 categories: battlefield, crowd control, destruction, mobility and tricks, stealth, summoning, and support. Because not every shout is trying to do the same thing. Comparing Dragonrend to Throw Voice is like comparing Alduin to a mudcrab. So with that said, stock up on Dragon Souls wizards, sharpen those tongues, and let's see which Thuum actually deserves the hype. Crowd control. Crowd control's always been a bit of a gamble in Skyrim. Half the time it saves us, the other half it just makes enemies scatter into the next province. This category is all about bending the battlefield, whether that's stripping enemies of their weapons, making them run, or just freezing them in place. And the contenders: Bend Will, Disarm, Dismay, Iceform, Kyne's Peace, and of course the classic Unrelenting Force. Now let's see which shout is the most overpowered. First up is Kyne's Peace. On paper, it sounds wholesome. Calm the beasts and walk among the wolves like some kind of Nord Disney princess. But in practice, it falls apart the second we set foot into a dungeon. Trolls don't care. Bandits don't care. And Draugr definitely don't care. So yeah, it's cute for a hunting run, or when we're sick of saber cats ambushing us. But as crowd control, it's more like country stroll, which brings us to something that does affect enemies: Disarm. This one at least sounds threatening. Rip the weapon out of an enemy's hands and leave them helpless. And when it works, it feels brilliant. But the problem? Most of Skyrim's enemies have the inventory of a traveling salesman. Take their sword, and they'll just whip out a spare dagger.
Can't wait to count out your coin.
Add in the strict level cap, and half the enemies we actually want to disarm late game are immune. So yes, it's satisfying when it works, but most of the time it's more party trick than actual control. Still, a party trick is better than nothing, which leads us to Dismay, a shout that finally affects entire groups. Dismay basically scares the living shit out of a crowd. It's the most literal form of crowd control. They run and we breathe. Except they don't stay gone. The second it wears off, they regroup, drag in friends from the next room, and suddenly our crowd control is crowd multiplication. And let's be honest, illusion magic does the same thing but better, with perks to scale. So yes, it can stall a fight, but it's hardly reliable. And that's why Iceform feels like an upgrade. Instead of enemies scattering or regrouping, they're frozen solid. 15 seconds of full paralysis with a 2 frost damage per second thrown in. However, the blast is narrow, so we've got to make sure we're accurate, and the freeze breaks instantly if the target takes damage, which means Lydia will ruin it faster than we can admire our handiwork. Still, at least immobilization is actual control. Compared to shouts that just delay or distract, this one buys real breathing room. But then we get to Bend Will, and suddenly everything else we've talked about sounds like child's play. With one word, we can cleanse the Allmaker stones on Solstheim. With 2, we can turn enemies into temporary allies for 30 seconds. And with all 3, well, we can straight up bend a dragon to our will and ride it into battle. No other shout in the game comes close to that kind of spectacle. And yet, for all its power, Bend Will has its limits. The cooldown is chunky, the undead are immune to it, and it's locked behind the Dragonborn DLC. So as ridiculous as it is, it's not the most reliable form of control. For that, we turn to a classic. Good old Fusro Da. With 3 words and a 45-second cooldown, almost everything in front of us goes airborne, including trolls, bears, and even giants. Damage isn't the point here, it's all about pure physics-based chaos. We can use it to clear a room, split a mob, or just casually punt a bandit off a cliff for comedy value. And unlike Bend Will, we don't need to slog through the DLC to unlock it. The Greybeards basically gift it to us early game. Add Parthenax's meditation bonus with a Dragonborn force, and it evolves from slapstick knockback to straight up execution. Enemies literally disintegrate. But either way, nothing else in Skyrim blends accessibility, raw control, and sheer comedy value like Fusrodar. That's why it's still the king of crowd control and one of the most overpowered shouts in the entire game. Mobility and Tricks. Mobility and Tricks is basically Skyrim's panic button category. It's less about domination and more about not dying stupidly, which, let's be honest, is half the game. And the contenders become Ethereal and Whirlwind Sprint. Yep, just the two for this one. Now let's see which is the best. Whirlwind Sprint launches us forward. 1 word gives 50 feet, 2 gives 75, and 3 gets us 100. But here's a fun fact. The 2-word version is actually the most efficient. It gives the best distance for the cooldown, which makes that last upgrade feel a bit like a Greybeard scam. Even so, this shout is absurdly useful. We can use it to skip traps, clear gaps, and even reach hidden ledges Bethesda probably hoped we wouldn't. It even works while encumbered, with 205 Dwemer scrap and 69,000 cheese wheels, a blessing for Skyrim's true endgame, hoarding.
I need to ask you to stop. That shouting is making people nervous.
The only real downside I see is human error. Misjudge a cliff edge, and congratulations, you're the latest entry in Skyrim's Darwin Awards. So it's great for mobility, but mobility is all it gives us, which is why Become Ethereal takes the same idea, don't die stupidly, and dials it up to pure god mode. This shout isn't just mobility, it's immunity. Dragon Breath? Blocked. Spike traps? Ignored. A 50-foot cliff? That's not full damage, that's fast travel with style points. For up to 18 seconds, we're basically a glowing ghost on vacation. Free to regen, prep a master spell, or just stand there grinning while a Draugr Deathlord slices through thin air like we're made of fog. Sure, we can't attack while it's active, unless we're cheeky enough to pair it with a Bloodskull Blade, but honestly that's a laughably small price to pay for what is essentially God mode on demand. Throw in summons or a cloak spell and suddenly everything around us melts while we stand there untouchable. It's dramatic, it's practical, and unlike Whirlwind Sprint, it never feels like a scam. Destruction. Destruction shouts are the Thuum at its flashiest. Fire, frost, tornadoes, and even the odd bit of soul theft. It's the category that looks amazing in trailers, but half the time feels like we're just making sound effects with extra steps. On the table, Cyclone, Drain Vitality, Fire Breath, Frost Breath, and Soul Tear. Now, let us analyze. Drain Vitality sounds terrifying, sapping 5 points of health, magicka, and stamina every second. But in practice, it's a drizzle of damage so weak we'll be collecting our pension before anything important dies from it. Cyclone at least gives us something memorable. Watching Draugr get yeeted upwards is peak Skyrim physics. But beyond the laughs, its actual damage is forgettable, and of course it's tucked away in the Dragonborn DLC. So fun for a montage, but kinda useless compared with what's still to come. And then there's Fire Breath. Now this one's iconic, the shout you'd expect from the Dragonborn. Early on, it feels powerful, like we've swallowed a flamethrower, but the damage drops off so hard that by the mid-game, game, it's more like shouting candlelight at our enemies and hoping they burn out of pity. Even Dragonborn Flame doesn't save it. Those so-called fireworms hit more like house cats than dragons. So flashy, sure, but as destruction goes, it's more smoke than fire, which is why we need something that actually changes the flow of combat, not just the visuals. Frost Breath is essentially Fire Breath's colder, meaner sibling, less about theatrics and more about results. Unlike Ice Form, it doesn't paralyze. It's all about damage first, with a side of slowing enemies down. At full power, we're talking 18 frost damage per second for 5 seconds, with a slowdown effect thrown in on a 90-second cooldown. So not amazing on paper, but that slow effect buys us time in ways Fire Breath never could. A charging bandit chief suddenly looks like he's wading through soup, and Draugr mobs stagger forward at a crawl instead of overwhelming us. Add the Dragonborn Frost power, and Frost Breath graduates from a decent shout to budget Ice Form. It encases enemies for up to 15 seconds, and unlike Ice Form, hitting them doesn't break the ice. That's not destruction, that's practical battlefield control baked into our lungs. But even with that upgrade, it still can't touch the sheer absurdity of the final contender. Soul Tear at full power rips 300 health out of an enemy, soul traps them, and if they die within 2 seconds, they come back as our personal undead sidekick for a full minute. That's an execution, a summon, and a flex all rolled into 3 syllables. Yes, it's locked to the Dawnguard DLC, and yes, the cooldown is chunky, but nothing else in Destruction delivers this much raw cinematic impact. It doesn't just melt enemies, it humiliates them, which is why Soul Tear isn't just the best in Destruction, it's one of the most overpowered shouts in the game. Stealth. Stealth shouts are for when we'd rather whisper than roar, and just like mobility and tricks, we've got only 2. Aura Whisper, Skyrim's built-in wall hack, and Throw Voice, the shout that convinces bandits to chase echoes like they're auditioning for Scooby-Doo. Now, normally I'd crown a single winner, but these 2 aren't rivals, they're a combo, like a good mead and cheese. Great on their own, yes, but together, borderline unfair. Aura Whisper is straight up X-ray vision for Skyrim. At full strength, we get 30 seconds of wall hack clarity, lighting up every living and bizarrely non-living threat within 300 feet indoors or 500 outdoors. That means Draugr, Daedra, and even Dwemer machines all glow like neon billboards. So forget those detect life spells, they just don't compare. With a cooldown that's only 30 to 50 seconds, we can sweep entire dungeons corridor by corridor without missing a beat. No, it won't kill anything itself, but it does stop plenty of things from killing us, especially those ambush-loving frostbite spiders who think dangling from ceilings is a personality trait. But scouting is only half the job. Knowing where enemies are doesn't matter unless we can move them around. That's where Throw Voice takes over. Throw Voice turns stealth into pure mischief.
Hey, ugly!
All 3 words live at SharePoint, and here's the kicker. The more words we use, the shorter the cooldown. So, maxed out, it's basically a 5-second spam machine for distractions. Bandits run off chasing shadows, traps trigger from a safe distance,
Hey, ugly!
and suddenly entire forts are cleared without us even drawing a blade.
Hey, Skeeverbutt!
It's misdirection, it's chaos, and it's absurdly effective. So which shout wins? Both. Aura Whisper scouts the dungeon, Throw Voice manipulates it, put them together, and sneaking in Skyrim becomes less stealth gameplay and more casual dungeon tourism. Oh, and if you really want to lean into invisibility while screaming your lungs out, quiet casting in the illusion tree makes sure nobody hears your shenanigans. Summoning. Sometimes the smartest move isn't swinging our own sword, it's hiring someone else to get battered for us. Summoning shouts are Skyrim's outsourcing department. Animals, ancient heroes, even full-blown dragons turning up to do the heavy lifting. And on the roster, Animal Allegiance, Call Dragon, Call of Valor, and Summon Durnehviir. Animal Allegiance is basically Kyne's peace with claws. Instead of politely asking wildlife to calm down, it makes them scrap on our behalf. Wolves, bears, and even mammoths will fight for us for up to a minute, which is much better than telling a sabercat to take a breather mid-maul. The catch, however, anything that actually matters like Draugr, Daedra, and dragons couldn't give a shit. So fun in the wilderness, sure, but it's practically dead weight in a ruin, which is why we need something with a little more staying power. That's where Call of Valor comes in. This shout drags a hero out of Sovngarde for 60 seconds of part-time heroics. They look impressive, they hit hard, and they'll happily tank while we chug a potion or two. But the time is short, and worse, they replace our normal summons. So instead of a permanent ally, it's more like a 1-minute tempire. Useful in a pinch, but next to dragons, it feels like a warm-up act. Which leaves us with the heavyweights, Call Dragon and Summon Durnehviir. Call Dragon brings Odahviing screaming out of the sky as our personal airstrike. And when he finally shows up, it's glorious. He wrecks enemies, soaks aggro, and makes us feel like we've got a dragon on retainer. Problem is, he's got attendance issues. Sometimes he takes his sweet ass time arriving, and indoors, forget it. He's just too much dragon to squeeze through the doorframe. Compared to Durnehviir, who shows up instantly, Odahviing feels like the flaky friend who promises he's on his way, but is still in the bath. And that's why Summon Durnehviir is the king of summoning. He's undead, he's reliable, and he pops in instantly, as long as we've got the space. And he's not just a dragon, he fights, he shouts, and he even raises 3 undead minions of his own. Now sure, he's DLC locked and has a chunky cooldown, but no other summoning shout tilts the battlefield this hard. With Durnehviir on our side, we're not just calling for help, we're rewriting the fight. Support. Support shouts are Skyrim's closest thing to teamwork. Battle Fury, Dragon Aspect, Elemental Fury, and Marked for Death all buff us or debuff enemies, basically turning the Thu'um into performance-enhancing drugs. But not all steroids are created equal, so let's start with the weakest, Marked for Death. Once upon a time, this shout was gloriously busted. It used to strip armor every second until enemies had the defense value of soggy parchment. But then Bethesda noticed we were having too much fun and patched it. Now it just shaves 75 points of armor for 60 seconds and dribbles out a laughable health drain which equates to about a 9% damage boost. So yeah, what used to delete bosses now feels more like a passive-aggressive cough. Battle Fury fares a little better. It's Elemental Fury, but for followers. At full strength, it gives them 3 minutes of swing speed steroid injections, which sounds great until we remember that our allies are still Skyrim NPCs. To make it worse, it only affects personal companions, not armies or quest NPCs. So unless we're role-playing as the head of a traveling circus, it's deadweight. That leaves the real heavy hitters, Elemental Fury and Dragon Aspect. Elemental Fury is all about pure speed. 3 words give a 70% boost to attack rate, which makes dual daggers look like a lawnmower possessed by sheer Gorath. The catch? It doesn't affect enchanted or bound weapons, which rules out a lot of late-game toys. But here's the loophole: dual wielding. The left-hand weapon sets the speed, so we can enchant the right-hand one and still get the buff. So in the right setup, Elemental Fury turns us into a blender on legs. But while it may be devastating, it's also a little narrow. We need the right build to unlock its true potential, which is why the next shout doesn't just feel strong, it feels like cheating. Dragon Aspect is the closest thing Skyrim gives us to God mode without cracking open the console. For 5 full minutes, we glow in spectral dragon armor, swing harder, take less damage, resist elements, and even shout faster. and it stacks in ridiculous ways. Transform into a vampire lord or werewolf and the buffs carry over, supercharging those forms. Additionally, if we drop below half health with at least 2 words, a ghostly dragonborn ally shows up as our spectral bodyguard. And he's no joke. He swings a Nord hero battle axe, throws out a range of shouts, and is basically untouchable. On top of that, Dragon Aspect upgrades a bunch of other shouts. Damage shouts hit 25% harder, and duration shouts last 50% longer. So it's not a buff, it's an entire upgrade package. The only drawback is that we can only use it once per day, but when it's active, we don't feel mortal. We feel inevitable. Battlefield. This category is all about domination. From yanking dragons out of the sky to turning Skyrim into a lightning rave, Battlefield shouts are the ones that make us feel like we own the place. And the contenders? Clear Skies, Dragonrend, Stormcall, and Slow Time. Clear Skies is basically Skyrim's weather app. 3 words and the rain, snow, or fog vanish for a whole minute. That makes it great for screenshots, handy for visibility, and technically required in a couple of Alduin fights. But outside of that, it's about as threatening as cracking open a window. Now yes, the first word does cause a stagger with almost no cooldown, and yes, we can technically spam it to chain stun enemies outdoors, but the moment we step inside, it flat out refuses to work. And let's be honest, if our master plan for battlefield domination is yelling a light breeze until enemies fall over, we've already lost. In a category built on raw power, Clear Skies is the odd one out, I'm afraid. That's where Stormcall steps in. On paper, it's the most metal shout in the game. Summon a thunderstorm, fry everything in sight, and strut around like a Talos on tour. The catch is reliability. The cooldown drags on forever, it only works outdoors, and it'll happily barbecue your followers or a passing courier without a second thought. Compared to Clear Skies, it's a spectacle, sure, but spectacle isn't the same as control. For real control, we need a shout that actually changes how we fight Skyrim's biggest enemies. Enter Dragonrend, the shout that keeps Skyrim from turning into a dragon sniping simulator 2011. 1 word interrupts breath attacks, 3 words force them to land for over 20 seconds, and suddenly we're fighting on our own terms instead of waving arrows at a flying dot. Sure, it's useless against anything that isn't a dragon, and sometimes the AI decides to take the scenic route before landing, but when it does what it's supposed to do, it transforms dragon fights from tedious aerial duels into actual boss battles. And in a game called Skyrim, that's a big deal. But even Dragonrend has its limits, because while it dominates dragons, it does nothing for the dozens of other fights we slog through. For that, we need something universal, and that's where Slow Time takes the crown. This shout doesn't just tip the balance, it flips the entire table. At full power, the world crawls at 10% speed, while we zip around like Neo from the Matrix with a war axe, dodging arrows, chaining combos, styling on bosses mid-swing. It's cinematic chaos every single time. Pair it with elemental fury and some cooldown reduction, and we're basically a blender in slow motion. With alteration perks or the right potions, we can even stretch it into absurd marathons, clearing entire dungeons before the first Draugr finishes a power attack. The cooldown's hefty, sure, but when a shout makes you feel like an untouchable god indoors and out, waiting a minute feels like nothing. Of all the battlefield shouts, this one doesn't just dominate one type of fight, it dominates every fight, which is why Slow Time isn't just the crown jewel here, it's one of the best shouts in the entire game.
At last, Sovngarde.